I think I didn't do anything wrong, just tried to protect my family from some uncomfortable truths. That's why I was so shocked when I opened the envelope and found legal documents. My husband was divorcing me and taking steps I never expected, all because of a simple DNA test I never thought he'd ask for. Before we dive deeper into the story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Rowena Glynn, and I'm 33 years old. I work as an administrative assistant at a medical office, and up until 6 months ago, I thought I had the perfect suburban life. I was married to Simon, a reliable engineer who provided for our family, and we had our beautiful 5-year-old daughter, Emily. From the outside, everything looked ideal. The house, the family dinners, the school pickups, but inside, I was drowning in loneliness. Simon had become so distant over the years. He'd come home from work, barely speak to me, and spend his evenings buried in his laptop or watching television. I felt invisible in my own home. When I tried to talk to him about it, he'd just nod and say he was tired or stressed about work. I needed more than that. I needed someone who actually saw me, who made me feel alive again. That's when Damien came back into my life. Damien Harker had been my boyfriend before Simon, back when we were in our 20s. He was everything Simon wasn't: charismatic, spontaneous, full of energy. He'd started his own business and was doing well for himself. When he reached out to me on social media, saying he was in town and wondering if we could catch up as old friends, I didn't see the harm in it. Our first meeting was innocent enough. We met at a coffee shop downtown, talked about old times, laughed about things we used to do together. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. Damien listened to me, really listened, when I told him how lonely I'd been feeling. He understood in a way that Simon never seemed to. "You deserve better than that," he told me, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "You always were too good for guys who didn't appreciate you." I should have pulled my hand away. I should have gone home to my husband and tried harder to fix our marriage. But Damien's touch felt like electricity after years of Simon's cold indifference. Before I knew it, we were texting every day. Innocent messages at first, just checking in, sharing funny memories, complaining about work. But gradually, they became more intimate. Simon started noticing my phone habits. I'd be texting during dinner, or I'd get messages late at night that would make me smile in a way I hadn't smiled at him in years. When he asked who I was talking to, I told him it was just an old friend who was going through a rough divorce and needed support. "You've been on your phone a lot lately," Simon said one evening, his voice flat and emotionless as always. "I'm just being there for a friend," I replied, quickly closing the message from Damien. "You know how it is when someone's going through a hard time." Simon nodded, but I could see something shift in his expression. He was watching me more carefully now, and it made me defensive. If he had been a better husband, if he had given me the attention I needed, none of this would have happened. I was only seeking elsewhere what I should have been getting at home. The situation got more complicated when Simon's mother, Maggie, started making comments during our weekly family dinners. Maggie had always been protective of Simon, and she had a way of noticing things that others missed. "You seem distracted lately, Rowena," she said one Sunday, her sharp eyes studying my face. "Is everything all right at home?" "Everything's fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just busy with work and taking care of Emily." But Maggie wasn't convinced. I could feel her watching me throughout dinner, noting how often I checked my phone, how I seemed to be somewhere else mentally, even when I was sitting right there at their dining room table. My own mother, Gwen, was much more understanding when I confided in her about feeling neglected in my marriage. "Men go through phases," she said dismissively. "Simon will come around. In the meantime, there's nothing wrong with having friends who appreciate you." My sister Hannah was even more supportive. At 31, she was still single and had strong opinions about women settling for less than they deserved. "You shouldn't have to beg for attention from your own husband," she told me over lunch. "If he's not meeting your needs, maybe it's time to think about what would make you happy." The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. I was in the kitchen, supposedly helping Emily with her homework, but really, I was texting Damien about meeting up the next day. Simon walked in just as I was deleting a particularly flirtatious message, and I fumbled with my phone, nearly dropping it. "Why are you acting so nervous?" Simon asked, his voice quiet but pointed. "I'm not nervous," I said, but my heart was racing. "You just startled me." He stood there for a long moment, studying my face with those analytical eyes that had once made me feel safe, but now made me feel exposed. Emily looked up from her workbook, sensing the tension between us. "Mummy, are you okay?" she asked in her sweet little voice. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, forcing brightness into my tone. "Daddy just surprised me." But as I turned back to help Emily with her math problems, my phone buzzed again on the counter. Damien's name flashed on the screen for just a second before I grabbed it and flipped it face down. When I looked up, Simon was still watching me, and something in his expression had changed. It was colder, more calculating than before. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Later." The conversation with Simon that night was awkward and stilted. He asked direct questions about who I'd been texting, and I stuck to my story about supporting a friend through a divorce. But I could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. The way he looked at me had changed. There was a distance there that hadn't existed before, a wariness that made my stomach churn with guilt and resentment. Instead of coming clean and trying to work on our marriage, I threw myself deeper into my relationship with Damien. At work, I found myself counting down the hours until I could text him, sharing details about my day and complaining about Simon's coldness. My colleagues at the medical office started noticing my improved mood and constant phone activity. "Someone's got you glowing lately," said Janet, one of the nurses. "New skincare routine?" I laughed it off, but inside I was thrilled that someone had noticed the change in me. For the first time in years, I felt attractive and desirable. Damien made me feel like the woman I used to be, before marriage and motherhood had worn me down into someone I barely recognized. Our coffee shop meetings became more frequent and more intimate. We'd sit close together, talking in low voices, and I'd find myself leaning into him, craving his touch. He'd compliment me on my appearance, tell me how beautiful I looked, how lucky any man would be to have me. After years of Simon's indifference, Damien's attention was intoxicating. "You're wasted on him," Damien told me during one of our afternoon meetings. "A woman like you should be cherished, not ignored." "It's complicated," I said, though part of me was already imagining what life would be like if I left Simon. "I have Emily to think about." "Kids are resilient," Damien said, reaching over to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. "They want their parents to be happy. How can you be a good mother if you're miserable?" His words made sense to me. I was miserable at home, going through the motions of being a wife and mother while feeling empty inside. Didn't I deserve to be happy? Didn't I deserve to be with someone who actually wanted me? The physical affair started gradually, a lingering hug goodbye, his hand on my lower back as we walked, stolen kisses in his car. I told myself it wasn't really cheating. Not yet. I was just exploring my options, figuring out what I wanted from life. Simon had driven me to this with his neglect and emotional unavailability. At work, I found myself sharing more details about my home life with my colleagues, painting Simon as controlling and distant. I needed their support and validation for what I was doing, needed them to understand that I wasn't a bad person, just a woman trapped in a loveless marriage. "My husband barely speaks to me anymore," I confided to Janet during a slow afternoon. "I feel like I'm living with a stranger." "That's terrible," she said sympathetically. "Marriage shouldn't feel like a prison sentence." But even as I was building support for my narrative at work, things were getting more complicated at home. Simon's parents were becoming increasingly suspicious of my behavior, and Maggie wasn't shy about voicing her concerns. "I'm worried about you and Simon," she told me after one particularly tense family dinner. "There's something different about the way you two interact." "We're just going through a rough patch," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "All couples do." "This feels like more than a rough patch," Maggie persisted. Simon seems hurt and you seem distant, distracted. I wanted to tell her that her precious son was the problem, that his emotional neglect had driven me to seek comfort elsewhere. But instead, I just smiled and changed the subject, inwardly seething at her interference. The situation came to a head during a family barbecue at Simon's parents' house. I was on my phone more than usual, texting Damien about our plans to meet later that week, when I noticed Janet from work had arrived with her husband. I hadn't expected to see her there. Apparently, her husband knew Simon from their engineering firm. "Rowena," Janet called out, waving me over. "I didn't know you'd be here." As we chatted, I saw her glance at my phone, which was still open to my text conversation with Damien. I quickly closed it, but not before she caught sight of his name and the heart emoji I'd started using next to it. "Who's Damien?" she asked casually, but there was curiosity in her voice. "Just an old friend," I said quickly. "He's going through a divorce and needs someone to talk to." Janet nodded, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was putting pieces together. My complaints about Simon, my improved mood, my constant texting, and now this mysterious friend who required so much of my attention. Later that evening, as we were cleaning up after the barbecue, I overheard Janet talking quietly to her husband near the kitchen sink. "I saw Rowena at that coffee shop on 5th Street last week," she was saying. "She was with some guy, and they looked pretty cozy. Not like just friends, if you know what I mean." My blood ran cold. I hadn't realized anyone from Simon's circle had seen me with Damien. I tried to act normal, continuing to stack plates and clear the table, but inside I was panicking. If Janet had seen us, who else might have noticed? Simon appeared beside me, quietly helping to gather the dishes. His movements were controlled and methodical, as always, but there was something different about his energy. He seemed to be listening to every conversation around us, processing information in that analytical way of his. "Ready to head home?" he asked, his voice neutral. "Sure," I said, trying to sound casual. "Let me just say goodbye to your parents." As we drove home in silence, Emily chattering in the back seat about the fun she'd had with her cousins, I kept stealing glances at Simon's profile. His jaw was set in a way that suggested he was thinking hard about something, and I had a sinking feeling that Janet's observation hadn't gone unnoticed. When we got home and put Emily to bed, Simon didn't immediately retreat to his laptop as usual. Instead, he sat on the couch and looked at me with those steady, analytical eyes. "Janet mentioned seeing you at a coffee shop," he said quietly, "with someone she didn't recognize." My heart started racing, but I forced myself to remain calm. "Oh, that must have been when I met with Damien. I told you about him. He's the friend who's going through the divorce." Simon nodded slowly. "Right, the friend you've been texting so much lately." "He's having a really hard time," I said, sitting down across from him. "I'm just trying to be supportive." "That's very kind of you," Simon said, but there was something in his tone that made me nervous. "I hope he appreciates having such a caring friend." The conversation ended there, but I could feel something shifting between us. Simon was watching me more carefully now, and I had the uncomfortable feeling that he was starting to piece together a puzzle I didn't want him to solve. The tension in our house became unbearable over the next few weeks. Simon wasn't confrontational. That wasn't his style, but he was observant in a way that made me feel constantly on edge. He'd notice when I deleted texts, when I stepped outside to take phone calls, when I came home later than usual from work. I felt like I was living under surveillance, and it made me resentful. Instead of backing away from Damien, I found myself clinging to him more desperately. He was my escape from the suffocating atmosphere at home, the one person who made me feel alive and desired. Our relationship had become fully physical by then, and I was spending lunch breaks and after-work hours in his hotel room whenever he was in town for business. "You look stressed," Damien observed during one of our afternoon meetings. "Is your husband giving you trouble?" "He's suspicious," I admitted, curling up against Damien's chest. "I think someone saw us together." "Maybe it's time to just tell him the truth," Damien said, stroking my hair. "You're not happy with him. You haven't been for years. Why keep pretending?" "It's not that simple," I said. "There's Emily to consider, and the house, and both our families. Life's too short to be miserable, Damien said. You deserve better than a husband who ignores you. His words echoed in my head as I drove home that evening. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to stop sneaking around and just admit that my marriage was over. Simon and I barely spoke anymore anyway, and when we did, it was tense and awkward. We were like strangers living in the same house. The breaking point came during Simon's father Peter's birthday dinner. Both families were there. Simon's parents, my parents, Hannah, and several of Simon's relatives I didn't see very often. The atmosphere was supposed to be celebratory, but I could feel undercurrents of tension, particularly from Maggie, who kept shooting me concerned looks. I'd been texting Damien throughout the evening, trying to coordinate when we could meet the next day. He was leaving town for a business trip, and I wanted to see him before he left. I thought I was being discreet, but apparently not discreet enough. "Rowena, could you put your phone away during dinner?" Maggie said sharply, her patience finally snapping. "It's Peter's birthday." The comment stung, particularly because it was delivered in front of everyone. I felt my face flush with embarrassment and anger. "Sorry," I said, sliding my phone into my purse. "Work emergency." "On a Saturday night?" Maggie asked, raising an eyebrow. "Some things can't wait," I replied, my voice tighter than I intended. The table fell silent, and I could feel everyone's eyes on me. Simon was staring down at his plate, his jaw clenched in that way that meant he was trying to control his temper. Emily was looking between us with worried eyes, sensing the adult tension she couldn't understand. "Well," said my mother Gwen, trying to break the awkward silence, "let's focus on celebrating Peter. How does it feel to be 64? The conversation moved on, but the damage was done. I felt humiliated and defensive, and as the evening progressed, I found myself making subtle digs at Simon. When someone asked about his work, I made a joke about how he was married to his computer. When the conversation turned to vacation plans, I mentioned how Simon never wanted to go anywhere exciting. "Simon's idea of adventure is trying a new brand of coffee," I said with a laugh, and a few people chuckled politely. But I could see the discomfort in their faces, the way they glanced at Simon with sympathy. Hannah jumped in to support me, making her own jokes about boring husbands and men who didn't know how to romance their wives. But Simon's family looked increasingly uncomfortable, and Simon himself had gone completely silent. "At least he's reliable," Maggie said pointedly, her eyes fixed on me. "Some women would appreciate having a husband who's steady and faithful." The word faithful hit me like a slap. I felt my face burn with shame and anger, and I could see in Maggie's eyes that she suspected more than she was saying. "Of course I appreciate Simon," I said, my voice falsely bright. "He's very dependable." The way I said dependable made it sound like an insult, and I saw Simon's hands tighten around his water glass. The rest of the dinner passed in uncomfortable small talk, with everyone pretending not to notice the tension between Simon and me. After we got home and put Emily to bed, Simon disappeared into his home office without a word. I could hear him on the phone, speaking in low voices, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. When I tried to enter the office to talk to him, I found the door locked, something that had never happened before in our marriage. "Simon," I called through the door, "can we talk?" "I'm busy," he replied, his voice muffled. "We'll talk tomorrow." But tomorrow came and went without any meaningful conversation. Simon left for work early and came home late, avoiding me as much as possible. When we did interact, it was purely functional. Discussions about Emily's schedule, household bills, logistics. The emotional distance between us had become a chasm. I threw myself even deeper into my relationship with Damien, spending more time texting him, meeting him whenever possible, and fantasizing about a life where I didn't have to sneak around to feel happy. But even as I was planning my escape from my marriage, I was starting to realize that my secret wasn't as well hidden as I'd thought. 3 weeks after the disastrous birthday dinner, I found a receipt in my purse that made my blood run cold. It was from a pharmacy for a prenatal DNA test kit. I had no memory of buying it, which meant someone else had put it there. Someone who suspected that Emily might not be Simon's daughter. Someone who was gathering evidence. The receipt in my purse felt like a bomb waiting to explode. My hands shook as I stared at it, trying to figure out how it had gotten there and what it meant. The date on the receipt was from the previous week, when I'd been at work and Simon had been home with Emily. Had he gone through my things? Had he planted it there as some kind of test? Or worse, had he already bought the kit and was planning to use it? I tried to act normal when Simon came home from work that evening, but my nerves were shot. Every time he looked at me, I wondered if he knew. Every casual question felt like an interrogation. When he asked about my day, I rambled nervously about mundane work tasks. When he mentioned that Emily had been asking about her family tree for a school project, I nearly choked on my dinner. "Maybe we should put together a photo album," Simon suggested, his voice casual but his eyes watchful. "Show her pictures of both sides of the family. Help her understand where she comes from." "That's a nice idea," I managed, though my mouth felt dry. "We should definitely do that sometime." "I was thinking we could start this weekend," Simon continued. "I found some old photos in the attic. It's interesting how genetics work, isn't it? The way certain traits skip generations, or how children sometimes look more like one parent than the other." I felt like he was speaking in code, testing my reactions. Emily did look more like me than Simon, but that wasn't unusual. Lots of children favored one parent over the other. It didn't necessarily mean anything. But as I looked at my daughter that night, really looked at her, I could see traces of Damien in her features, the shape of her eyes, the way she smiled, certain expressions she made when she was thinking hard about something. How had I never noticed before? Or had I been deliberately avoiding seeing the resemblance? I called Damien that night after Simon went to bed, stepping out into the backyard for privacy. "I think Simon suspects something," I whispered into the phone. "About us?" Damien asked. "About Emily? About who her father really is?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Damien and I had never explicitly discussed the possibility that Emily was his daughter. When I'd gotten pregnant 6 years ago, I'd been sleeping with both men, though I was married to Simon and living with him. I'd chosen to believe that Simon was the father because it was easier, because it fit the life I wanted to have. "Are you sure she's mine?" Damien asked quietly. "I don't know," I admitted. "The timing, it could go either way." "Jesus, Rowena, why didn't you ever get a test done?" "Because I didn't want to know," I said, tears starting to flow. "Because I wanted her to be Simon's. Because it was easier. And now I think Simon's going to force the issue. I found a receipt for a DNA kit in my purse. I think he's planning to test her." Damien was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want me to do?" "I don't know," I sobbed. "I don't know what to do." The next few days passed in a haze of anxiety. I watched Simon constantly, looking for signs that he was planning something. I noticed he'd been staying late at work more often, and when I called his office, his secretary said he was in meetings. I wondered if he was talking to a lawyer, or a private investigator, or someone else who could help him gather evidence against me. The confrontation came on a Thursday evening. I was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner when Simon walked in carrying a small box. My heart sank as I recognized the packaging. It was a DNA test kit. "We need to talk," he said, setting the box on the counter between us. "What is that?" I asked, though I already knew. "I think you know what it is," Simon said quietly. "The question is why I felt like I needed to buy it." I tried to summon indignation, to act like he was being ridiculous and paranoid. "Simon, this is crazy. Why would you even think—" "Because you've been lying to me," he said, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel. "For months, maybe years. I don't know how long you've been having an affair, but I know you are." The words hung in the air between us like a physical presence. Part of me felt relief that the secret was finally out, but a larger part felt panic. If he knew about the affair, it was only a matter of time before he started questioning everything else. "I haven't been—" I started, but Simon held up his hand. "Don't," he said. "Don't insult my intelligence. I've seen the texts, the phone calls, the way you light up when you're talking to him. I know you've been meeting someone, and I have a pretty good idea who it is." "It's not what you think," I said desperately. Damien and I are just friends. He's been helping me through a difficult time. A difficult time that you created by checking out of our marriage, Simon interrupted. A difficult time that you've made worse by lying and sneaking around instead of talking to me. You never want to talk, I exploded, my guilt transforming into anger. You come home, you ignore me, you act like I don't exist. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to try to fix our marriage, not destroy it, Simon said. You were supposed to be honest with me about what you were feeling, instead of running to another man. You don't understand what it's been like, I said, tears streaming down my face. I've been so lonely, so invisible. Damien makes me feel alive again. And what about Emily? Simon asked, his voice breaking slightly. What about our daughter? The possessive way he said our daughter made my stomach clench. He still believed Emily was his, still thought of her as his child. The DNA test kit sat on the counter between us like an unexploded bomb. Emily is fine, I said. She doesn't need to know about any of this. We can work things out. Can we? Simon asked. Because I'm not sure we can. I'm not sure I can trust you anymore, Rowena. And if I can't trust you... He picked up the DNA test kit and turned it over in his hands. I need to know the truth. All of it. Simon, please, I begged. Don't do this. Don't destroy our family over a mistake. I'm not the one destroying our family, he said quietly. You did that the moment you decided to have an affair. He left the kitchen with the DNA test kit, and I sank into a chair, my whole body shaking. Everything was falling apart, and I didn't know how to stop it. I thought about calling Damien, but what could he do? I thought about calling my sister or my mother, but how could I explain this mess? Instead, I sat in my kitchen and cried, knowing that in a few days I would have an answer that could change everything. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I realized that I might lose not just my marriage, but my daughter as well. The wait for the DNA results was the longest 2 weeks of my life. Simon had sent the samples to the lab himself, using his own credit card, making it clear that he didn't trust me to handle any part of the process. We barely spoke during those 14 days, moving around each other like polite strangers sharing the same space. I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy for Emily's sake, but even she could sense that something was wrong. She started having nightmares and clinging to me more than usual, asking why Daddy seemed so sad all the time. Are you and Daddy getting divorced? She asked me one morning, as I was braiding her hair for school. The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. Why would you ask that, sweetheart? Because Jenny at school said her parents acted like you and Daddy before they got divorced. They didn't talk to each other, and they looked sad all the time. I forced a smile and hugged her tight. Daddy and I are just going through a rough patch. Everything's going to be okay. But even as I said the words, I didn't believe them. I could see the way Simon looked at Emily now, with a mixture of love and desperate uncertainty. He was trying to memorize her face, to hold on to every moment with her, because he suspected that she might not be his biological daughter. The results came on a Tuesday. Simon picked up the envelope from the lab himself and brought it home during his lunch break. I was at work, but he texted me a single word: home. I told my supervisor I was feeling sick and drove home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I found Simon sitting at the kitchen table with the unopened envelope in front of him. His face was pale, and his hands were clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. I wanted you to be here when I opened it, he said without looking up. I sat down across from him, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Simon, before you open that, I want you to know... Don't, he said sharply. Don't try to explain or justify or prepare me for what's in here. I just need to know the truth. He tore open the envelope with steady hands, though I could see the muscle in his jaw twitching. He pulled out the official-looking document and read it silently, his face growing paler with each line. Finally, he set the paper down and looked at me with eyes that were completely empty. According to this test, there's a 0% probability that I'm Emily's biological father, he said, his voice hollow. Even though I'd known this was a possibility, hearing it confirmed felt like the world was collapsing around me. Simon, How long have you known? He asked. I didn't know for sure, I said desperately. I suspected, but I wasn't certain. The timing was so close, and I wanted her to be yours, so I convinced myself. How long have you known? He repeated, his voice harder. Since she was about 2, I whispered. She started looking more like him, but I told myself it was just my imagination. Simon stared at me for a long moment, and I could see something dying in his eyes. So for 3 years, you've let me believe she was my daughter. You've let me love her, raise her, plan for her future, all while knowing she probably wasn't mine. You are her father, I said, tears streaming down my face. Biology doesn't matter. You've been there for every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every first day of school. You're the only father she's ever known. But she's not mine, Simon said, his voice breaking. She's his. She's Damien's. The name hung between us like a curse. For the first time, Simon had acknowledged that he knew who Emily's real father was. What are you going to do? I asked, though I was terrified of the answer. Simon stood up from the table and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where Emily's swing set stood. I don't know, he said. I need time to think. Over the next few days, Simon became a ghost in his own house. He went to work, came home, helped Emily with her homework, and read her bedtime stories, but he moved through these routines like a man in a trance. He slept in the guest room and barely acknowledged my presence. I tried to talk to him, to explain my side of things, but he wouldn't engage. When I followed him into his office one evening, he looked up from his computer with such pain in his eyes that I stepped backward. I need you to leave me alone right now, he said quietly. I'm trying to figure out how to handle this without destroying Emily in the process. We can get through this, I said desperately. Families survive worse things. We can go to counseling, We? Simon laughed bitterly. There is no we anymore, Rowena. You made sure of that when you decided to have an affair with your ex-boyfriend and pass his child off as mine. I didn't plan for this to happen, I protested. It just happened. No, Simon said, turning back to his computer. Affairs don't just happen. They're a series of choices. You chose to meet him. You chose to text him. You chose to lie to me. And you chose to sleep with him. You chose all of this. A week after we got the DNA results, Simon asked me to meet him at a law office downtown. My stomach dropped when I saw the address. It was one of the most prestigious family law firms in the city. I walked into the conference room to find Simon sitting across from a sharp-looking woman in an expensive suit. There were papers spread across the table, and I could see my name on several of them. Mrs. Glynn, the lawyer said, standing to shake my hand. I'm Patricia Wells. Please, have a seat. I sat down next to Simon, but he wouldn't look at me. His face was set in stone, and I could see that he'd made some kind of decision. Simon has asked me to prepare divorce papers, Patricia said without preamble. Given the circumstances, the affair and the paternity issue, this is likely to be a complicated case. Paternity issue, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Simon is seeking full custody of Emily, Patricia continued. Despite the DNA results, he's been her father figure for 5 years and wants to maintain that relationship. However, he's also requesting that you pay child support, since Emily is biologically your responsibility. I stared at Simon in shock. You want to take Emily away from me? For the first time since we'd gotten the DNA results, Simon looked directly at me. I want to protect her from the chaos you've created, he said. I want to give her stability and honesty, 2 things she won't get if she stays with you. She needs her mother, I said desperately. She needs a parent who won't lie to her about who she is, Simon replied. She needs a parent who won't use her as a pawn in games with other men. I never used her as a pawn, I protested. Didn't you? Simon asked. You let me bond with her, love her, and raise her, all while knowing she might not be mine. You used my love for her to keep me in a marriage where you were cheating on me. If that's not using her as a pawn, I don't know what is. Patricia slid a thick stack of papers across the table to me. These are the divorce and custody papers, she said. You have 30 days to respond. I'd strongly recommend that you get your own attorney. I stared down at the papers. seeing my life dissolve into legal jargon and court dates. Simon, please, don't do this. We can work things out. Emily needs both of us. Emily needs stability, Simon said, standing up, and she needs parents who tell her the truth. Since you've proven you can't do that, I'm going to make sure she at least has one parent she can trust. He walked out of the conference room without looking back, leaving me alone with Patricia and a stack of papers that would change everything. The next 3 months were a blur of lawyers and heartbreak. My attorney, Rebecca Torres, warned me early. The DNA results are devastating. The best we can hope for is visitation. I clung to the idea that being Emily's mother would matter, but Simon had the stronger case and the moral high ground. His lawyer presented texts, receipts, and the affair timeline. My lies about Emily's paternity sealed my fate. Simon testified with quiet heartbreak. I love her like she's my own, he said, voice cracking. I've been there for everything. I don't want to lose her because of her mother's choices. When I took the stand, I tried to explain loneliness, confusion, denial, but under cross-examination, the truth was laid bare. I'd lied for years and let another man raise a child who wasn't biologically his. The verdict came swiftly. Simon received primary custody. I got supervised visitation and court-ordered counseling. I was to pay child support. After court, Simon said only, "I hope he was worth it." Then he walked away. Outside, I finally understood. The DNA test hadn't destroyed my life. My lies had. I'd lost my husband, my daughter, and everyone's trust. Now all I had left were short visits, monthly payments, and the wreckage of the family I'd destroyed myself. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching, or watching, or watching, or watching, or watching, or watching.